The sky outside our window was still dark when Everett took his last breath. His hand, once so steady and calloused from a lifetime of woodworking, went limp in mine. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it, the stillness, the way his chest simply stopped rising. But the silence that followed confirmed what my heart already knew. He was gone. I didn't cry. Not yet. I sat there beside him, still holding his hand, watching his face in the faint morning light. The lines that had deepened over our 42 years together seemed to ease. His expression looked almost peaceful, as if sleep had finally released him from the months of pain. A part of me waited for him to stir, to sigh, to blink anything. But there was nothing. Just the steady ticking of the wall clock and the hum of the refrigerator down the hall. I stood up slowly, joints stiff, and walked to the kitchen for the phone. I didn't need to think about who to call first. My hands moved from habit. I pressed the familiar number and held the phone to my ear with fingers that felt colder than they should have been. It rang 4 times before she answered. "Hello." Callista's voice was groggy, distant. I swallowed hard. "Callista, your father passed away early this morning." There was a pause, then a rustle like sheets shifting. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mom. Today's Miles' birthday. Remember, we've got people flying in. I don't think I can make it out there today. Maybe I can come next week." My mouth opened, but nothing came out. The line was quiet, except for her breath. I felt suddenly unsteady, the counter pressing into my palm. "We'll talk later," she said softly. "I'll call you tonight, okay?" I hung up before I could answer. The silence returned thicker this time, stretching across every room of the house. I turned back toward the bedroom where Everett still lay, unaware that his only child had other plans today. I stood at the kitchen sink after the call, the phone still in my hand. Outside, the sky had lightened to a dull gray. The house, always so full of Everett's steady presence, even in silence, felt unbearably hollow. I set the phone down gently on the counter and gripped the edge with both hands. I wasn't angry, not then. Just stunned. Numb. Callista's voice still echoed in my ears, cheerful and distant, as though she'd been reminded of a dentist appointment rather than told her father had died. I had imagined her reaction differently, even rehearsed the words in my head, hoping for tears or disbelief, or even stunned silence. What I got was logistics, a schedule, guests. I boiled water for tea because it gave my hands something to do. As the kettle hissed, I drifted back to Everett's room. I pulled the blanket up to his chest, smoothed the sheets one last time. His face looked so familiar, even in death. My eyes stung, but no tears came. Maybe they would later. By mid-morning, I had called Pastor Fenwick the funeral home and Everett's brother Leo. I left a message for Declan Murray, our lawyer, to start the paperwork. Everyone I spoke to was kind, gentle, offering the right words, even if they couldn't soften anything. I told them the funeral would be Monday, 11 o'clock at Graceview Chapel. I debated calling Callista again to tell her the time. But what would be the point if she couldn't make room in her weekend for her father's death? I doubted she'd shift Monday's luncheon plans for the funeral. I thought of Miles, the way he always talked over her, the way she checked with him before answering the simplest questions. I had once thought he was just assertive. Now I saw something else entirely. The kettle screamed. I turned off the stove and poured the water, watching the tea bag darken the cup like a slow bruise. I carried it into the living room and sat in Everett's armchair, wrapping my fingers around the warmth. It was quiet again, too quiet, and I knew what had to come next. Monday came with the kind of weather Everett would have called funeral sky. Low clouds, a wind that moved like it had somewhere else to be. I dressed slowly, choosing the navy coat Everett always said made me look dignified. I pinned his cufflinks to my collar. I don't know why, maybe because I needed to carry some part of him with me. Graceview Chapel smelled like dust and old wood, just like I remembered from the years of services we attended together. They had already set out the folding chairs and placed the casket at the front. Everett looked calm, almost expectant, as if he were just waiting for me to join him in the pew. People arrived in waves. Neighbors. Friends from the library where I used to work. Everett's old bowling buddy brought his son. A former colleague came in from Eugene. They shook my hand, hugged me, gently pressed words into my shoulder. He was a good man, a steady man. You two had something rare. I nodded, thanked them, but I kept glancing toward the door. When Pastor Fennick approached, his voice was low, hesitant. Your daughter, was she able to come? I managed a tight smile. She had something urgent, out of state. He only nodded, not pressing, but I could feel the truth rising in me like a storm I couldn't let out. I turned away before it showed in my face. The service was simple, just as Everett would have wanted. Psalm 23. How great thou art. Stories from those who knew him about the fence he built. For a neighbor, the Thanksgiving turkey he carved with surgeon-like precision, the time he spent 3 hours fixing a stranger's flat tire, because it was the right thing to do. I sat alone in the front pew. The only person who should have shared that seat with me was lying in the casket, and the other who belonged there had chosen a party in New York over her father's goodbye. As the casket was wheeled out and the organ played softly, I walked behind it with steady steps. But something had shifted. Something small but permanent. Later that night, I sat at the kitchen table looking at Everett's favorite coffee mug and the stack of condolence cards piled beside it. The air was heavy with quiet. And in that silence, a decision began to take shape. The morning after the funeral, I called Declan Murray and asked if he had time that afternoon. His voice, always courteous, carried that careful tone lawyers use when grief is fresh. He offered to come to the house, but I told him I needed the drive. His office sat on the corner of Pine and Jefferson, above an old tailor shop. Everett and I had been there many times over the years for mortgage papers, for our will, even for the paperwork when Callista got married. I climbed the narrow staircase slowly each step, feeling heavier than it should have. Declan greeted me in the small reception room and offered coffee. I declined. I didn't want comfort. I wanted clarity. He waited until I sat down across from his desk before speaking. Maureen, I'm so sorry about Everett. He was a good man. I nodded, my hands folded in my lap. Thank you. I'm here because I need to revise the will. He leaned back, slightly surprised. Of course. We can certainly do that. Any specific changes? I want to remove Callista. He blinked. Remove her entirely. Yes. Everything was supposed to go to her. Our house, the savings, Everett's retirement. I want it reassigned. Declan hesitated. May I ask, is this about the funeral? It's about what the funeral revealed. I kept my voice steady. Everett spent his life working, saving, building this home for us and for her. And when it was time to say goodbye, she chose brunch and balloons. He was quiet for a long moment, then reached for a legal pad. We can redirect assets. Do you have a beneficiary in mind? I'll send you the details, I said. A literacy fund Everett supported and the cancer hospice. Let what we saved go to those who know how to show up. He nodded slowly, scribbling notes. I'll draft a revision, but I must say, this might be challenged down the road. I'm not doing this out of spite, I said. I'm doing it because Everett deserved a daughter who could say goodbye. By the time I left Declan's office, the wind had picked up. I pulled my coat tight and walked back to the car, feeling the kind of quiet that settles only after something final has begun. The letter reached Callista on a Thursday afternoon. I know because I got a call that evening, 3 missed calls, in fact, all in the span of an hour. I didn't answer any of them. She left a voicemail, voice tight and clipped. "Mom, I got something from the lawyer. Is this real? Call me back, please." I didn't. I had nothing to explain. Later, Declan called to let me know he'd sent the official notice. He said she hadn't taken it well. I could imagine. I pictured her standing in that sleek kitchen of theirs in Manhattan, marble countertops, gleaming Miles in the background, pouring his usual imported whiskey. I imagined the envelope torn open, her eyes, scanning the words, then narrowing, then widening. The way she would have pressed her lips together, her voice sharpening into that practiced, polished tone she used when cornered. I imagined Miles brushing it off. "It's symbolic," he would say. "She's grieving. She'll cool down. Give it a few weeks." And maybe he believed that. Maybe she did too. But the silence that followed after those calls told me something had landed differently this time. Something unexpected. That letter wasn't just a document. It was a mirror. And perhaps for the first time in years, Callista saw not just what she had lost, but what she had become. It wasn't about the money. Not really. It was the finality, the statement behind it, the realization that I no longer saw her as part of my legacy, not because of a single mistake, but because of the pattern she never tried to break. I didn't feel satisfaction, only certainty. 3 days passed. Then another call came, not from Callista, but from someone at the front gate. I looked out the window and saw a rental car in the driveway, the silhouette of a woman sitting still in the front seat. Callista had come home. Not for the funeral. Not for Everett. But now. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel just after noon. I was in the garden, kneeling beside Everett's rose bed, trimming back dead leaves. The early spring air still had a chill, but the earth was warming. I didn't turn around right away. I knew the sound of her walk. She didn't call out. "Hi, Mom," she said after a moment, standing at the edge of the garden in a long coat and ankle boots, better suited for a city sidewalk than my muddy yard. I straightened, brushing soil from my gloves. "You came." "I got your letter," she said. "Or rather, the lawyer's." I nodded and turned back to the roses. They needed pruning. "Can we talk?" she asked. I stood slowly and walked toward the porch. "If you're here to ask me to undo what I've done, don't waste your breath." She followed me, not saying anything, until we sat a wooden table between us. "I made a mistake," she said quietly. "I should have come." I looked at her. "You didn't forget the funeral, Callista. You chose something else. That's not a mistake. That's a decision." She flinched. "Miles, he had people flying in. It wasn't that I didn't care." "No," I said. "It was that you cared more about him, about appearances, about convenience." She sat back, arms folded. "It wasn't like that. Wasn't it?" The silence grew. I leaned forward, voice low. "If I died tomorrow and Miles had a client dinner the next night, would you come?" She opened her mouth, closed it, looked down at her hands. "That's what I thought I said." "I don't know," she whispered. The wind picked up across the porch. We sat in the sound of it. "I didn't come here to argue," she finally said. "Then why did you—" She paused again. "Because I saw what was in that letter." And for the first time, I realized what I'd lost. I didn't answer. I stood, walked back toward the garden, and began gathering the clippings into a bag. She stayed seated, watching me, her eyes following every movement. That night, She stayed in her childhood room, and in the quiet dark, I heard her crying. For the first time in years. She didn't stay long. 2 nights, maybe. She helped me make tea, offered to run errands, but neither of us spoke much beyond what was necessary. She cried quietly the first night, and I let her. The second night she was silent. When she left, she hugged me briefly at the door, a gesture more instinct than intimacy. I didn't ask when she'd be back. She didn't say. Weeks passed before I heard from her again. A short message left on my machine. I'm back in the city. Just thinking things through. Declan called me a month later. I assume you haven't changed your mind, he asked. I haven't, I said, though I hadn't stopped thinking about her either. In late May, a letter arrived. Her handwriting, rounder, less practiced than I remembered, filled a single page. She didn't ask for money. She didn't mention the will. She wrote about how quiet the apartment felt without Miles traveling for work, how strange it was to make her own breakfast again. She said, I'm starting to realize how many decisions I let someone else make for me. I learned later that she'd filed for divorce just after returning to New York. According to a friend from her college days, she'd packed up that sleek, cold apartment and moved into a small walk-up in Brooklyn, a place with no elevator and just enough room for a bookshelf and a second-hand sofa. She sold her designer bags, canceled the club memberships, let the expensive hair appointments go. Instead, she started volunteering. First once a week, then nearly every day. A literacy nonprofit, ironically, the kind Everett used to support. She read to kids in waiting rooms, sorted donated books, helped with reading assessments for under-resourced schools. I imagined her sitting in a circle of second graders, reading Charlotte's Web, her voice soft but steady. She called me one afternoon in early June. I'm not asking for anything, Mom, she said. But I'd like to come back for Dad's birthday. Just to bring flowers. That's all? I said yes, not because I owed her, but because something in her voice had changed. The envelope came in the mail, no return address, but I knew the handwriting. My name, carefully written in blue ink, looked steadier than I expected. I opened it slowly, as if the paper might break in my hands. She didn't ask for anything. There was no mention of the will, no references to what had been lost. Just words that felt raw and unfamiliar coming from her. Mom, it began. I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I'm not writing to ask for it. I'm writing because I've carried a silence inside me since Dad died, and it's become too loud to ignore. I wasn't there when I should have been. I failed him. I failed you. And I've thought every day about what it must have felt like to bury him alone. I'll never be able to make that right. But I am trying to become someone he would have been proud of, even if it's too late to show him. There was more about the nonprofit, about the kids, about how reading to them reminded her of the nights Everett read to her when she couldn't sleep. She ended simply, I hope you're well. I miss you. Callista. I read it once. Then again. I didn't cry. I didn't know what to feel. I folded the letter carefully and carried it to Everett's room. His glasses still sat on the nightstand untouched since the day he passed. I placed the letter beneath them. He always believed she'd come around. Later that day, I watered the garden and cut 3 stems from his favorite rosebush. The ones he always said smelled the strongest right before they wilted. I stood on the porch with the flowers in hand, watching the road. Not waiting, just watching. The next morning, I heard a car door close and footsteps on the walk. When I opened the door, she was there holding a bouquet of sunflowers and a folded lawn chair. By late September, Callista had become a regular figure in the garden. She didn't announce her visits anymore. She'd just appear often, with her sleeves rolled up a trowel in one hand and a plastic tub of seedlings in the other. She worked in silence, not out of distance, but something closer to respect. The kind of quiet you hold for something you almost lost. One Saturday afternoon, she brought someone with her. Julian was gentle-eyed, soft-spoken, the kind of man who listened before he talked. A school counselor, she said. They met at the library where she volunteered. I watched them work side by side, pulling weeds, exchanging glances I recognized. The kind built from small, honest things. After lunch on the porch, Callista turned to me, one hand resting on her belly. There's something else I wanted to tell you. I waited. It's a boy. We'd like to name him Everett. The air stilled around us. For the first time in a long while, something inside me eased. Not with words, but with knowing. Not everything broken stays that way. I didn't say much, just nodded. Then later that week, I visited Declan again. We sat in his office like we had months before, only this time the weight I carried was different. Split it evenly, I said. Half to Callista. Half to the Children's Literacy Fund. Declan raised an eyebrow but didn't question me. He knew the change hadn't come overnight. That weekend, Callista brought clippings from the library's fall book fair and left them on the kitchen table like she used to as a girl. She asked what Everett might have thought of Julian. I told her he would have liked him. She smiled, and in that smile, I saw the girl I once knew finally returning home. It's been a year. I sit on the porch in the late afternoon, the sun soft on my shoulders, and watch little Everett toddle through the garden with both fists full of dandelions. He doesn't care that they're weeds. He picks them like treasures, dropping a few every few steps, squealing when one floats away in the breeze. His legs are wobbly, his balance stubborn, and every now and then he looks back to make sure I'm watching. I always am. Callista comes by every Saturday now. She brings fresh bread, sometimes new picture books from the library, sometimes nothing but herself and the baby on her hip. She reads with the children at the Public Branch Lead Storytime every Wednesday and started a weekend tutoring group for struggling readers. She never talks about Manhattan anymore. That life feels like it belonged to someone else. Julian joins her most weeks. He carries Everett on his shoulders, fixes the loose fence slat without being asked, and never forgets to bring in the mail. He's quiet in all the right ways and warm in all the others. I see the steadiness in him, the kind of man who shows up without fanfare. There are still moments now and then when something tightens in my chest. A memory, a glance, that ache that never fully leaves when someone you loved doesn't get the goodbye they deserved. But it's softer now, lighter. One afternoon, Callista sat beside me, Everett asleep against her chest. She said almost to herself, I don't think I ever stopped being your daughter. I just forgot how to act like it. I didn't say anything then. I just reached for her hand and held it. Some people return not because you demand it, but because they finally remember who they are. And this time when she came back, she brought the best of herself with her.